Okay, good morning, everyone. We're going to start from the Mishnah on the bottom of Gedalia and BAYT. I think Rabbi Spitz might have done it yesterday, but we'll just do the Mishnah and then we'll continue. The Mishnah begins, Amar Rabbi Yossi, Ma'aseh v'tinokas shi'arda lamalos mayim min ha'ayin. There was a young girl who went to the well to fill up water, v'nensa. When she was there, she was raped. Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, Imrov anshe ha'ir masin lekahuna Raizel tinasei lekahuna. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, if the majority of the people living in that city, misin, what does misin lekahuna mean? Misin lekahuna means that there's some men, if they have relations with a woman, so that woman is no longer permitted to marry a Kohen. So Mesin L'Chahuna is referring to men who, even though they have relations with a woman, the woman will still be allowed to marry a Kohen. So provided that the majority of the men in the city Mesin L'Kahuna, in that case, Raizel tinasei L'Kahuna, she will then be permitted to marry a Kohen herself. So now the Gemara begins. Amar le Rava Rav Nachman, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Damar Kaman. The Shita opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, who said that if the majority of the men in the city are Mesin L'Kahuna, then she can marry a Kohen. So who's he in accordance with? And whose opinion? I Rabban Gamliel afilu b'rav psuli nami b'chasher, and I Rabbi Yoshua afilu b'rav ksheri nami pasil. So it doesn't seem to be like either the opinions we've seen in the previous Mishnah with respect to Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yoshua. Because if it's according to Rabban Gamliel, then even if the majority of the people, the men in that city, are psulin, she would still be allowed to marry a Kohen. And Rashi explains the Islay Hamed Isha al Cheskasa, because she has the chazaka. The status quo from her perspective is she can marry a Kohen. Unless she knows for sure that the person who raped her was somebody who would not permit her to marry a Kohen afterwards, she can go ahead and marry a Kohen. So even if the Rov are pasul, she'd be okay. And according to Rabbi Yoshua, even if the Rov are ksherim, she'd be pasul. So how do we reconcile this? Or who is Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri following? Amar le hachi amar Rav Yehuda amar Rav. No, the case is a bit different. Rashi explains that when we say this la'olam k'Rabbi Yoshua, that really in general we would follow Rabbi Yoshua, but this case is different. Why is this case different? Because Hachi Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Bikronos Shel Tzipori Haya Ma'aseh. The story took place Bikronos Shel Tzipori. What does Kronos Shel Tzipori mean? Rashi explains Biyom Hashuk, at the top Rashi on Tesvav Amud Aleph. Biyom Hashuk, it was referring to the market day in Tzipori. Shesios v'shayaros mimakom acher paus sham. It is the day when all of the caravans and the peddlers are coming through town. Let's do the Rashi in the previous page also, when we said Amar le Hachi Amar Rav Yehuda. So the Olam Rabbi Yoshua. Really, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is following the opinion of Rabbi Yoshua. The Hacha Mishum Diika Trei Robi Lekashrus Achshara. And the only reason why in this case Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri permitted her to get married is because we were dealing with the case where we had two rovs. We had two majorities, as we're going to see what the two majorities are. Uchi de Rabbi Yehuda. We're going to explain the reason. Why do we need two and as opposed to one? So what is the case? How do we have two rovs in this case? So we're dealing with the case where we said it's the market day, and therefore all the peddlers and the caravans and people are traveling through this city. And in accordance with Rabbi Ami, continuing the Gemara, Dama Rabbi Ami, V'hu shahaisa siya shel bnei Adam ksherin overes l'sham. The case that we're dealing with is the majority of the people who are passing through the town, the peddlers and the people in the caravan, are also kasher. So therefore, what do we have? We have a rove of the people in the city itself are ksherin, and therefore, plus we have a rove of the people traveling into the city are also ksherin. Since we're dealing with two roves, it's okay. Uchi de Rabbi Yanai, and also like Rabbi Yanai, the Amar Rabbi Yanai niv eles bikronos kshera lekahuna. If she has relations in the wagon, then she can marry a Kohen. The Gemara asks, what do you mean? Bikronos al kadaitech. Elaniv elas bishas kronos. If she is raped at this time when on the market day, again when the people are coming to the town, in that case kshera lekahuna. Aval, however, Piresh Echad Mitzipori Ubaal Havlad Shtuki. What does it mean? Piresh means if one person from Tzipori separated himself and had relations with her. If she know, which means Rashi says that if you know for sure that the man you had relations was from Tzipori, as in now you lose your second rove. Before we said we had two roves. We don't know who raped her, but perhaps it was somebody from the town, and the majority of people in the town are sharing the kahuna, and perhaps it was somebody from the caravan, and the majority of the people are also sharing the kahuna. But Rabbi Anna is saying here is if you know for sure that one of the people who's coming, a Pirish Echam Tzipori, the person who raped her was from Tzipori, if you know that for sure, then Havlad Shtuki. We can't assume that the child is a full-fledged Jew, he's a Shtuki, because again, we only have one rove in this case. And now we're going to prove a similar case. Kiha dechi asa Rav Dimi amar Reb Ziri amar Rabbi Chanina va'amrila amar Reb Ziri amar Rabbi Chanina. And as we have the following statement from Ziri and Rabbi Chanina, Holchin achar rov ha'ir ve'ein holchin achar rov siya. That we follow the majority of the city. If you have a rove in the city and that's what you're dealing with, we can follow the rove. However, when dealing with these caravans, you can no longer follow the rove. And the Gemara asks, "Klape lai, what are you talking about here?" It seems to be exactly the opposite. Why? Hani naidi v'hani kvi'i v'kaimi. When it comes to the people in the caravan, so hani naidi. If you look in Rashi, what does Rashi say? Rov sia naidi. The majority of the caravans are moving around. Why is that important? Specifically, because they move around, we should follow their rove. V'hani shel ir, but those living in the city are kvi. They're set where they are. They're in place. And why is that important? Rashi explains v'amrin l'kaman, and we're going to discuss an important principle very soon. Kol kavua kemechza al mechza dami. There's a principle that we will I'll explain now, but we'll get into more detail soon, of kol kavua. In general, we follow the rov. If you have a majority, we say holchin achar harov. However, we have a principle of kol kavua kemechza al mechza dami. What does that mean? I'll use the case the Gemara is going to explain later on, just to highlight. The case talks about is there are 9 stores that sell kosher meat, and 1 store sells non-kosher meat. So if you bought from one of the stores, and you don't know which store you bought from, so even though majority of the stores are kosher, since you don't know what store you bought from, the meat is aser. Why? Because kol kavua kemechza mechza dami. That since the store, the non-kosher store, almost stays where it is, and you went towards it, it stayed as is, and you went towards it, we're no longer able to treat that as something which came out of the rove, called the parish miruba parish. We can't treat it as, well, let's look at the majority. Rather, we have to look at it and say, no, since it remains as is, we have to treat it as if it's 50-50, and even though there's 9 kosher stores and 1 non-kosher store, we treat it 50-50, and therefore you're not allowed to eat the piece of meat. So that's the principle of kol kavua kemechza mechza dami. So the application to what we're talking about is, again, the statement that we just made was holchin achar rov ha'ir, and we're not in holchin achar rov siya. But I don't get it. The people in this city are kavua, they're staying where they are. If they are staying where they are, then we should apply the principle kol kavua kemechza mechza dami. We shouldn't be allowed to follow the rove. However, the people traveling, so they are separating from the group almost. And since they're separating from the group, we should say kol de parish miruba parish, and therefore be permitted to rely on the rove. So why does this statement seem to be the exact opposite? So therefore we changed the statement, we amended it a bit. Ella, rather, what it meant to say is holchin achar rov ha'ir. We can follow rov ha'ir if you have the majority, a certain majority in the city. V'hu di'ika rov siya bahada, provided that there's also the second rov together with it, the rov siya, that the majority, again, if the rov of the city are people who are sharing the kahuna, we can only follow that rove provided that there's, again, it's the market day and the people coming into the city, most of them are also sharing the kahuna. And then the statement continues, Ve'ein holchin achar rov ha'ir gredita, below achar rov sia gredita. And we don't follow each one independently. We don't follow rov ha'ir if that's all we have. And if we only have rov sia, we don't follow that either. Why? My taima. Gzera rov sia atu rov ha'ir. We make a gzera, we don't want you to follow the rov of sia, the majority that comes out of these, let's say, these caravans, because we're concerned that you will end up following the majority, the rov in the city, which is problematic. So we said, V'rov ha'ir nami. And then we said, what's so problematic about the city? Idika azli inhu ligaba, called the parish meruba parish. Where, meaning, where it seems like, where was this woman raped almost? It seemed like it was outside the house. So meaning that somebody had to leave their house or almost leave the city and go and once they did that, we can say, well, they're no longer kavua, they're parish. And called a parish, meruba parish. So what's the problem? Why can't we follow rov ha'ir? So we say, lo tzricha deka'azli ihi ligabayhu. No, because the case is she went to one of them. So therefore they were kavua. And tahavele kavua, and therefore it's kavua v'amar abzera kol kavua kemechza al mechza dami. So the case is, why do we need two rovs? We say we can't follow the rov that comes out of the caravan, the people coming out of the caravans, lest you come to follow the rov of the city. And what's the problem following the rov ha'ir? Again, if the men left their house, called the parish meruba parish? No, because we're concerned that, or the case is that she went to them. And if she went to them, when it comes to the city, that's a case of kavua, kol kavua kemechza al mechza dami, and therefore you can't rely on that. So therefore we don't allow you to rely on the rov that comes out of the majority and the people in the caravan themselves, and we require you to have two rovs in this case. That is how they explain the case.
Just go back to the meat thing for a second. I thought we learned it just the opposite. That if you find a piece of meat, you don't know where it's from, that you do follow the majority.
So let's. The meat case is coming up right now. So let's. We'll be able to.
Hold on.
Umi ba'ina and shrei rubi. Is it? Do we actually require two rovs in all these cases? Vehatanya. But the Brisa teaches us the following. Teisha chanuyos kulan mochros basar shchuta. 9 stores sell kosher meat. Ve'achas mocheres basar nevela, and one sells non-kosher meat. Bilakach me'achas mehen. You went ahead and bought from one of the stores. Ve'eno yodea me'eze mehen lakach, and you don't know from which store you bought it from. Sveiko aser. So therefore, since suffix, it's aser to eat the meat. However, uvinimtza, if you find the piece of meat on the street, then halach achar harov. Then you can follow the rov. What is the rov in this case? Rov of the stores sell kosher meat, and therefore you should be allowed to eat the kosher meat. So what is the implication? The implication, how many rovs do we have here? Only one. Rov of the stores sell meat, and yet we're allowed to rely on the rov. So where does this concept of two rovs come from? So now the Gemara suggests, "V'chitema b'she'ein tlatos medina neulos dika'asi la ruba me'alma." Perhaps you'll tell me the case is we're dealing with a city, let's say like Toronto. So not only do you have, the 9 kosher stores. Okay, then you have the 9 kosher stores versus the only one non-kosher, but also it's open. The city gates are not closed, and therefore perhaps we're dealing with two rovs. The rov of the stores in the city sell kosher meat, and then in addition to that, you have the ruba me'alma, which Rashi explains as follows: "Tekasi la ruba me'alma, uchigon sherov sias tabache Yisrael ksherim ba'ulakan." Meaning the majority of the people again traveling through the city, all these chefs. So they're ksherim, the ikat trei rubi, and therefore we're dealing with the case of two rovs. Oh, sherov tabache kol hamedina Yisrael, or perhaps the majority of the region, however you want to define it. The majority of the stores in the region are kosher, the ikat trei rubi, rov ha'ir, rov hamedina denaidi. Okay, Toronto wasn't a good example. Let's say you take the city in Israel, right? Let's say you have a city where the majority of the stores are kosher, some are not kosher, and then you also, let's say, but maybe we're dealing with the case where we have a second rov, because since the city is locked and people are traveling through, perhaps the piece of meat fell from somebody else, and therefore you can have two rovs. But the problem is, the Gemara continues, Because we said latos medina neulos the kasi la ruba mialma. That's not true. V'ha'amar Reb Zera afal pishat latos medina neulos. Reb Zera says this ruling that if you find a piece of meat on the street, you're allowed, as long as the rove of the stores are kosher, you can eat the piece of meat. Applies even when the city walls are locked. So that means we're only dealing with one rove. So how come in our Mishnah we require 2 roves if here it's 1 rove? Mala asa biyuchsin. Principle comes up numerous times, probably came up in Yevamos a little bit, that when it comes to Yuchsin, when it comes to determining the lineage of the Jewish people, so we often have a higher standard. So when it comes to determining the lineage, we want to make sure everything's kosher and clean, so we require 2 roves. But in general, when it comes to eating, kosher versus non-kosher, it suffices to rely on 1 rove. The Gemara continues, going back to this principle we just talked about. Gufa. Amar Reb Zera kol kavua kemechza mechza dami bein lekula bein lechumra. Reb Zera says that, again, this principle that kol kavua, if something remains where it is, then we treat it kemechza al mechza. We treat it as if it's 50-50, and this works bein lekula bein lechumra. This works to be lenient, and it works to be stringent. So minali the Rabbi Zera. How does Rabbi Zera know this halacha? What Mishnah, what teaching led him to say that we can rely on kol kavua kemechza mechza dami l'chumra, and l'kula? Ilima mitesha chanuyos kulan mokros basar shchuta v'achas basar neveila. If you want to tell me from the brayso we quoted before that 9 kosher stores and 1 non-kosher store, v'lakach me'achas mehen ve'no de'mezeh min lakach, and you bought from one of them and you don't remember which one you bought from. Sfeiko aser, so then it's aser. Uvenimtza, but found on the street halach achar harov. So in that case, kol kavok mechza mechza dami hasam l'chumra. That only teaches us a chumra, because we're dealing with 9 kosher stores, 1 non-kosher store. But since that 1 non-kosher store is kavua, we treat it kemechza mechza, and you can't rely on the rope. So therefore, that's a chumra case. So that can't be, that only teaches us one side of the coin. Ella, perhaps, mitishat svardim v'sheretz echad beinehem. We're dealing with a case where we have 9 frogs and 1 other sheretz, 1 other creature. Now the svardim are tehorim, and the sheretz here is tameh. So what's the case? So tishat svardim v'sheretz echad beinehem. So you have 10 of these animals together. V'naga be'echad mehen, and you touched 1 of the animals. So we're dealing with, I think they're dealing with dead, because I think they're only tameh once they are dead. So you have these 10 dead creatures together. 9 are frogs, which are not tameh. 1's a sheretz, which is tameh. And you touch one, and then ve'enu de'be'ezim and nagan. You don't know which one you touched. So sfeiko tameh. So we say that you are tameh. So hasanami l'chumra. That's also a chumra, because you only have 1 tameh animal together with 9. The majority are tahorim. But since it's kavua, kol kavua k'mechza mechza dam, we treat it 50-50, and therefore we treat you as you are tameh. So that's also not helping us. So Ella, from this last case, mitisha shratzim b'tzvarteya echad beinehem. We're dealing with a case of 9 now tmeim animals. 9 animals are tameh, and only 1 tzvardeya, only 1 is now tahor. V'naga be'echad mehen, and you touch 1 of them. Ve'ena yodea be'eza mehen naga, and now you don't know again which one you touched. So it depends. If in your Rishus HaYachid, Sfeiko Tameh, because we have a principle, Safek Tuma and Rishus HaRabim, Tameh. So therefore, this is Safek Tuma, and you are Tameh. Birshus Harabim, Sfeiko Tahor, and Rishus Harabim, if you're in Rishus Harabim, the Safek is Tahor. But either way, we have a Safek in both of these cases. And more importantly, in the second case, Rishus Harabim, it's a Safek, and then we're Meiko. Right? You only have one Tahor animal. You have 1 amongst all 10. But since we say kol kavua kemechza al mechza dami, we treat it as if it's a safek, equal safek. And for Rishus HaYachid, Rabim, safek tumah Rishus HaRabim is tahor. And therefore, we found the case now, bein l'kula, bein l'chumra, we see here where you where the principle of kol kavua k'mechza mechzadami works both ways.
The reason why he's tar is a completely different principle. It's nothing to do that the majority of them or the minority of them.
Correct, but we only treat it as a suffix, I think, because we say kol kavua k'mechza mechzadami. That's the point. Meaning, generally, you say, "We'll follow the robe," and therefore she's
no. But in Rosh Hashanah doing about Tomei and Tohar, it's got a whole
correct. The whole principle of suffix tu mershus yachid tamei and suffix tu mershus rabim tahor is a separate principle. But how do we even get that suffix in the first place? The only reason we get to a level of suffix is if we applied the principle of kol kavua k'mechza mechzadami. If we didn't apply the principle, we'd say, well, let's follow the majority. There wouldn't be a suffix. The rove of the animals are, tzmeim, and therefore you're going to be tummy. You won't even have a suffix. So the principle of kol kavua tells us, no, since you have that one tower animal in there, we treat it as if it's a 50-50. We treat it as a suffix, and then that allows us to go to the next stage, which is, well, suffix tumer shusay rabim shusay yachid. So that is how the principle is working.
The reason it works here is because the suffix is not in the proof of the animal itself. It's extrinsic, right? It's not the suffix is from outside as opposed to inside of the animal itself. In other words, if it was in the animal itself, we had a shiloh, we knew which animal it was, we had a shiloh within that animal, then the suffix would be the humor, right?
I understand what you're saying. I don't recall.
If it's in itself, it would be a suffix to the right to the humor, because it would be a suffix within the animal.
I understand what you're saying. It could very well be. I don't know. I don't know that principle 100%. So it could be, but I can't recall that right now. So that's where we see the teaching which teaches us kol kavua k'mechza mechzadami. But now the Gemara asks, beyond that, umidoraisa minalan. But how do we rely on this principle? We're saying now we're assuming that this principle is doraisa. Kol kavua k'mechza mechzadami. What is the source in the Torah which teaches us this halacha? So Amar Kra, the pasuk teaches as following: V'arav lo v'kam alav. It's referring to when a person kills somebody else. V'arav lo, he ambushed him. V'kam alav, and he came upon him. So what do we learn from there? The Gemara says, Ad sheyiskavein lo. Rabbi Shimon, Rashi tells us that according to Rabbi Shimon, what does he learn from this pasuk? The arav lo, v'kam lo, both the Rashi here tells us, Prat la miskavein laharog ezeh, v'harag ezeh. It comes to exclude a case where you intended to kill one person, you intended to kill Reuven, and you came and you killed Shimon instead. So Rabbi Shimon learns that if you intend to kill Reuven and you kill Shimon, so then he doesn't have the same level of obligation because he didn't intend to kill the person that he killed. But the Rabbanan argue. They say no. If you had intention to kill somebody, then you are going to be chayav. So what did they do with this pasuk of ve'arav lo ve'kam lo? V'Rabbanan Amri debei Rabbi Yanai Prat lizorek even lego. We're referring to a situation where you have a group. Rashi here tells us Prat lizorek even lego listoch chaburas bnei Adam. We're dealing with a group of people standing together, Knanim v'Yisraelim, non-Jews and Jews together. Aval shnei Yisraelim omdim. But if you have two Jews standing together, v'niskavin laharog zeh v'harog zeh, and you intended to kill one and by accident killed the other, v'hasrubo, but they gave him proper warning, don't throw the stone towards those Jews, v'kibel hasra, and he heard it, v'nafla, hakal chavero chayav. V'nafla hakal chavero, but he ended up killing one of them, he's still chayav. V'hainu time at the kamar hacha, b'rabana mishum sanhedrin hachi isa. Okay. So that is. But now the Gemara asks again, Heichi dami. What is this case when you're throwing it into a group of people? How does this? What is it dealing with? If we're dealing with a case where there were 9 Knanim, 9 non-Jews, and 1 Jew, Benehem. So v'tevugle deruba Knainim ninhu. So again, the question that we're dealing with is, can we go ahead and kill Again, can we give the death penalty to the one who killed this other fellow? So we're saying if the majority of people standing there are non-Jews, so then obviously you can't kill him because the Rov are Knani. So inami palga, and even if you say it was 5 Jews and 5 non-Jews standing there, we still couldn't kill him. Why? Safek nefashos lahakel. Now, Saving Nefashos Lahakel here, it's not like the principle you normally, Saving Nefashos Lahakel means if you're not worried about your life, if you're concerned, maybe you're in danger, right, violate, maybe Saving Nefashos Lahakel. But here, what Rashi tells us is Dine Nefashos Lahakel, because again, we're dealing with perhaps trying somebody and putting him to death. So even when it comes to putting somebody to death, we're going to be makil. And if it's only a 50-50 chance, perhaps he, intended to kill perhaps he was going to end up killing a non-Jew as opposed to a Jew where the punishment would be slightly different. Again, then there's nothing to talk about. So lo tzricha, so what's the case? Di'ika tisha Yisraelim v'kinani echad binehem. We're dealing with a case where you have 9 Jews and 1 non-Jew standing among them. Dahavile Knani kavua, because in that case the Knani, everyone's kavua, but so is the Knani. The chol kavua kemechza al mechza dami. Since the non-Jew is standing in between everybody else, we can now treat it as a 50-50 case, and you wouldn't be allowed to kill him. So that is the case where the Rabbanan are arguing and saying no. Even I guess.
It's lahakel.
It is lahakel. I'm sorry, I'm just taking a second here. Right. With the point, again, the whole point of this, we were trying to show how we know kol kavua kemechza al mechza dami, and we're learning it out because that is the case. That is the way we're going to explain ve'aravlo v'kamalav. It's dealing with the case where you have 1 non-Jew and these 10 Jews there, and since you have not 1 non-Jew and let's say 9 Jews there. But since the non-Jew is kavua, so therefore we can't give the death penalty to this other person.
I thought that a Jew was Chayiv Misa for killing a Kanani. Didn't we learn just now that the slave, that the Kanani, this week, that the Kanani slave, if you kill him, you're Chayiv Misa? The owner? You're not Chayiv Misa for Kanani?
What's the, does it mention specifically? It talks about knocking out his teeth and knocking out all that. Does it mention the case of?
If you kill him by accident.
No, if anything, it's talking about the ox who kills him. And perhaps that was different. No, the death penalty is... No, you do not receive the death penalty.
You kill the slave, he goes free.
That's not... that's not the punishment. That's not the punishment. So the Gemara now continues. Itmar. Rav Chia bar Ashi amar Rav halacha Rabbi Yossi. So the first opinion says the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi was our first opinion in the Mishnah. It talked about the case where she can marry the Kohen. Rav Chanan bar Rava amar Rav horas sha'a haisa. No, we don't follow that la halacha. That was a one-time ruling. So we're going to explain that a bit. So Mesiv Rabbi Yirmiyah. So Rabbi Yirmiyah asks the following question: Uli yochsin lo ba'inan trei rubi. He says, according to Rav Ashi, he said, if Rov Anshe Ha'ir are Mesin L'Kuna, he says you can marry the Kohen. So Rabbi Yirmiyah comes and says, but don't you need 2 Rovs when it comes to Yochsin? We have the following Mishnah. Matzah bat tinok mushlach. You find an abandoned child on the street. Imrov of de kochavim, obed kochavim. If the majority of the people in that city are non-Jews, so we treat the abandoned child as a non-Jew. Imrov Yisrael. If the majority of the people in the city are Jewish, we treat the child as Jewish. Mechza al mechza. If it's a 50-50, Yisrael, we treat it as a Yisrael as well. Ve'amarav, but Rav said, Lo shanu elalach yoso. When we say that we treat him as a Jew with respect to what? That's only with respect to, Rashi tells us, Beis Din Misuvin Lefarneso. Beis Din is required to make sure this child, give him sustenance, make sure he has what to survive on. Because of the pasuk Bechei Achicha Imach, Achicha referring to a Jew. Aval Yochsin, however, when it comes to Yochsin, when it comes to allowing him to marry somebody else, and lo. Right, Rashi says Dimbasi Asur LeKohen. When it comes to matters of marriage, we're not going to rely on the Rov to assume he's Jewish and therefore marry anybody who he wants. So the implication from here is that again, for Yochsin, this is what we've seen before. When it comes to Yochsin, we require 2 rows. And then Shmuel, we'll get back to the statement in a minute. Ushmuel Amar, Shmuel says, Lefakeach alav es hagal. It's referring to a case, Lefakeach alav es hagal is referring to a case generally on Shabbos. If you find somebody underneath a pile of stones on Shabbos, are you allowed to remove the stones? Are you allowed to remove the stones in order to save the person's life? So Shmuel is saying, it's unclear what case he's talking about, but he's saying it's referring to Lefakeach alav es hagal. So the assumption is he's talking about that if Rov Ovdei Kochavim, if majority of people are not Jewish, we treat the child as not Jewish, and that what that means is that if you find this child underneath this pile of stones, you would not be allowed to remove the stones because you're not allowed to do that to save a non-Jew. That is ignoring the whole principle of Mishum Eva. We have a principle of, speak to the doctors nowadays in terms of treating patients. It really, halacha states that the Gemara talks about a Jewish doctor not being able to treat non-Jewish patients on Shabbos. But then you come into situations where the Gemara says, no, Mishum Eva, if you're concerned that it's going to lead to hatred, animosity between the non-Jews, and it perhaps even to the level of putting the Jewish lives at stake, so therefore we permit a lot of things, Mishum Eva.
Even a 1% chance that the person's Jewish when you.
So we're going to get to that in a sec. That's the question they're going to ask. So that's I'm saying the assumption at this point in the Gemara is Shmuel's talking about that first case, but correct, we're going to change that very soon. But let's go back to this whole question. The whole question was, one of the opinions before said to be Paskin like Rabbi Yossi, saying, but Rabbi Yossi is only talking about 1 rov. The Mishnah, if rov anshe ha'ir mesin lekahuna, you can marry Kohen. But don't you need 2 rov? Don't you need 2 rovs in order to marry for Yochsin in order to marry? So the Gemara answers, it's true. Rabbi Yirmiyah is the one who asked this question. Rabbi Yirmiyah forgot the Gemara. The Gemara tells us that the case that Rabbi Yossi is dealing with is not 1 rov. The case Rabbi Yossi is dealing with is 2 rovs, because we're dealing with a case at the market day and the people are coming in, and therefore you have 2 rovs. So his question was based on a false premise. He assumed Rabbi Yossi was talking about a case of 1 rov, and he thought he had a good question, but he forgot the teaching where we said no. He's only talking about a case of 2 rovs, and the problem falls away. That's answer 1. But then we say Ul Rav Chanan Barava da Amar Horas Shah Haisa Kashyaha. But according to Rav Chanan Barava, who said that it was Horas Shah, then he has a problem, because what if the case in the Mishnah is dealing with a case of 2 rovs, and Rav Chanan Bar Rava says that was only permitted because of a horasha. There were some dire circumstances that we had to rely on it in that case, which would imply that in other situations you couldn't even rely on 2 rovs. So then you'd have a problem. Here in this Mishnah of the abandoned child, we rely on, seemingly it would be enough to rely on 2 rovs. But over there you want to tell me that they could only rely on the 2 rovs because of horasha. So then the Gemara answers, "Man de masniha, lo masniha." It's true, the 2 are incompatible. If you think that, as in to say, if you think it was a horasha, it was only a horasha lekula. Meaning, if you think it was a horasha, that's because you disagree with Rav Yehuda Marav, and you don't think the story was in Tzipori, b'Tzipori b'Kronos shel Tzipori. The 2 are incompatible. So therefore, if you think it's a horasha, what the Gemara is telling us is a horasha which allowed you to rely on 1 rov. Whatever the circumstances were there, they thought it was dire enough. In this case, we'll allow you to rely on 1 rov. However, in general, you need 2 rovs in order for when it comes to matters of yochsin. That's how they interpret that Gemara. Gemara continues. Kufa. Going back to our abandoned child case. Matzah batinok mushlach. If you find the abandoned child, imrov of de kochavim, if the majority of the people, again non-Jews, we treat as non-Jew. Imrov Yisrael, mechza, Yisrael. Amarav lo shanu el lachyoso, aval liyochsin lo. Ushmuel amar lefakech alav esagal. This goes back to what we just saw. Umi amar Shmuel hachi. Does Shmuel actually say this? The Hamar Rav Yosef Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Ein Holchem B'Koch Nefesh Achar Harov. When it comes to matters of life and death, we don't follow the Rov, even if there's a 1% chance that it's perhaps a Jewish baby under there. So we save them. We don't start. Majority people in the city are, then I can do it. You don't make those calculations. You go ahead and you make the decision right away. So we say Ela ki itmar the Shmuel Reisha itmar. So what Shmuel is talking about is the first case. As in to say, the first case was Imrov Ovdei Kochavim, Oved Kochavim. However, Amar Shmuel Ulfakech Alav Esagal Eino Kain. When it comes to, again, trying to save the life, then we don't treat it as a non-Jew. Then, Ein Holchem B'Kol Nefesh Achar Harov, we treat it as if it's a Jew underneath. So now the Gemara is just going to try to further explain all the nafkamina here. So we just said, the Mishnah says if majority of the people in the city are not Jewish, we treat the baby as non-Jewish. But we just said that when it comes to Pikuach Nefesh, we treat it as Jewish. So with respect to what, we treat it as not Jewish. We don't have to give them kosher food. You can save some money and give them non-kosher food. So we just said if the majority of people are Yisrael, then we treat them as Yisrael. What is that referring to? Because Rav already said, well, not for Yochsin. So with respect to what, we treat it as Yisrael. Amar Rav Papa lahachzir lo aveda. We return our lost objects to them. You only have to return lost objects to Jews. We'll treat them like that. Mechza al mechza Yisrael l'may hilchasa. What is that referring to? Amar Reish Lakish l'nezikin, to damages. So hey chidami, what is this last case talking about? If our ox was gored his ox, so lemale aisiraya d'Yisrael atushkol hamotime chaver labaraya. You bring me proof that you are Jewish. If you bring me proof that you're Jewish, then I'll pay you. If not, I'm not going to pay you. So how can we treat him? We just said mechza, we treat him as Yisrael, but we'll just say motime chaver labaraya. Burden of proof is on you, so that doesn't help. The case is that his ox gored our ox. Correct. So palga mishalem. So what's the case? We have a halacha with respect to damages of short term, that if the animal is not assumed to gore other people, it doesn't have a chazaka to do so, then it only has to pay half damages. But that only applies to a Jewish Jewish owned ox. A Jewish ox, yeah, I know. So the if he wears a kippah, he's okay. So the case is, so what do we say? Palga mishalim. So again, his ox gored the other person's ox. So we require him to pay half. The idach palga, with respect to the other half, Amar lehu, he'll tell Aisiraya de lav Yisrael ana. Bring me proof that I'm not Jewish. And ve'asan lechon, and then I will give you the money. So with respect to that case, we can assume he's Jewish, and the burden of proof now is on the other side to say prove that he's not Jewish. If they prove that he's not Jewish, then they can go ahead and take the full payment for what they had. Okay, so let's just do the next first Mishnah. Probably do it again tomorrow, but just to get started with the next parak. A woman gets divorced or is widowed and now wants to collect her ksuba. She says, I was a besula when I got married and my ksuba is 200. She says, no, I married you, you're an almana, and your ksuba is only 100.
Pretty easy to check that out, isn't it?
Sorry?
Pretty easy to check that out.
Well, obviously, we're dealing with a case where they don't have the ksuba written in front of them.
No, as far as that she was a widow.
Sorry?
That she was a widow when they got married.
No. We're talking about, again, at the current moment, she's either divorced or widowed.
Right.
But again, everything, her ksuba now depends on what it was when they got married.
I understand. Right.
So
I don't know whether she was a psula, even though she was widowed or divorced, she still can be a psula. Is that what you're saying?
We're not dealing with almana, meaning now we don't longer care about almana grusha. Now we're dealing at the time when they got married. What was her status? Was she a besula or was she not a besula?
Or a widow. It says either she's a widow or a besula.
No. It says now we're dealing with the case. Now she's a widow or she's divorced, and therefore because now she wants to collect her ksuba. Her husband passed away or they're divorced, so she wants to collect. No, not dealing with the second husband.
From the first husband who she got widowed or divorced from.
Sorry, I understand Mendel's question. The first husband, the second husband is still
There's no
alive.
second husband.
There's no second husband. You're either dealing with the husband or the children of the husband. That's what you're dealing with. So the woman had a marriage. She's now divorced or widowed. She wants to collect her ksuba from her first marriage. There's no second marriage here, but her ksuba all depends on, and obviously they lost the document, so they want to know how much is she owed? How much is she entitled to? If she was a basula when she got married, with this marriage, she deserves 200. If she was not a basula, she only gets 100. So she says 200. The other party says 100. So if there are witnesses that she was probably, I think it means they took her out, they carried her out on a chair. You know this Farnim when they have the what's it called before the wedding?
The henna?
I think the henna, right? They carry out on the chair. So something like that. If they carry out the woman on the chair, if they were aiding that she did that, or that Birosha Paroa, her hair was out, it said that her hair was on her shoulders. Ksubasa Masayim. It's her Ksubas Masayim, because they only did these with the hair or carrying her out with the basula. They wouldn't do that if she wasn't a basula. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Amar Ap Chilu Klayos Raya. Even if they distributed nuts at the wedding, that's also a sign that she was a basula. So if you have edim saying regarding one of these events that prove that she would have been a basula, then she could collect 200. Umode Rabbi Yoshua. So Umode, Rashi explains, not really unclear what he's referring to with the Mode, but we'll get to that in the Gemara. Rabbi Yeshua says, "Be'omer lechaveiro sadeh zo shel avicha haisa ulekachdia heimenu." So if a man tells somebody else, "This field used to belong to your father, but then I bought it from him," shehu neman. So we believe you to say now that it's your field. Why? Shapesha asar u'pesha hitir. We employ the principle here of, because the only way we know it belonged to your father was because you said it. We wouldn't have had any knowledge that it used to belong to your father. So if you say, it's true it belonged to your father, but I bought it from him, so the Pesha Asar, the peh which told us initially that it belonged to that family, is the same peh that's telling us that he bought it from him, and therefore we can believe you to say it is yours. It's almost like a migu plus. Right? A migu is if you have, sometimes we believe you with the claim you made, because if you wanted to lie, you could have made a better claim. So this is even better than that, because this is saying you are the one who told us, the detrimental evidence towards yourself, right? The incriminating evidence, we'll call it that. But you're also the one who then told us, but really you made up for it. It's true, it used to belong to you, but I bought it from you, and therefore we can believe you to say that the field belongs to you. The case, but the Mishnah concludes, but if there were witnesses stating that the field initially belonged to this other person's father, and now Reuben says, "Oh yeah, but I bought it from your father," then eino neman. Why? Because there's no longer a pesha aser pesha hitir. There's no longer pesha aser. Because what is the thing which is aser now? It's not his peh. It's the edim. Since there are edim that are telling us it used to belong to his father, all he's saying is, "I bought it from your father." And we'll say, well, why should we believe that you bought it from your father? And therefore, we wouldn't necessarily believe that the field is yours. Okay, everyone have a good day.